When I was 7 or 8, my family went to the beach and rented a room. We had the kind of rooms where you rent out both and they connect through a door. Like there are the doors to leave the room and the doors to the other room. In the room connected to ours, there was this army family, military dad, some kids and a wife. My older sister was supposed to be watching me as we were down at the jacuzzi during the evening, as we were playing and hanging out and just having a good time. I didn't get out much, was naive and all around a little kid. This mom literally sits in the jacuzzi with us. She starts stalking Tussin. It's just making herself real comfortable. Eventually, we start talking about books, and she's talking about her kids who we haven't seen, and we're just having a good conversation, really in depth. I felt like my sister decides she wants to go back to the room, but I don't. I wanted to stay and talk with the mom. So she goes back to the room, and now it's just 7-year-old me and some 40-year-old woman. It should have set off some creepy alarms, but it did not. So she starts talking about going and walking on the beach. It's like 10 p. Man, she wants to walk on the beach and find shells. I thought it was a great idea. I get a walk on the beach at night. It felt Savrian like a big kid. I didn't need my sister or anything. So I run back to the room to tell my grandparents that I'm walking on the beach with Sue or whatever her name was. I remember my grandmother reading her book, barely listening to what I said. She just shooed me off. It is important to know I didn't live with my parents. So I start walking down creepy motel corridor. It truly was a dark, dim stairwell at a cheap motel on the beach. So I'm going through the stairwell like something out of a movie. Too bad I'd never seen this one. So I'm walking through the stairwell, mom's way at the bottom telling me to hurry up and this and that. While walking through the stairs, the army dad comes running calling, asked where I'm at. He told me, your mom is calling you, it's really important, we have to go. And basically grabbed me by the wrist softly, not aggressively, and led me back to her room. He knocked on the door and explained what had happened. I never thought much of Hill about a year ago when he came back to me. This woman was leading me way to the beach alone at night, and this army guy got a terrible feeling in his gut, so he intervened. When he said my mom was looking for me, I don't live with my mom, he set off some alarms in my head. That's when I realized something was up, so I didn't resist going back to my family. As a kid, I knew since he was saying my mom wanted me, it was important. I just knew something was up because I don't live with my mom. I'm now 20 years old, and it truly believed that mom was trying to lure him away to dog. God knows what, and this army dude had a bad feeling and saved my life. Thinking back, I get such a bad feeling all throughout my body. I know, now I wouldn't have made it back from that beach trip story too. In March 1996, I was 16 and joined the British Army. When you join the armed forces in the UK, you started. It's different now, with 10 weeks in basic training. As I was going to be an army chef, I attended Dead Pierbright training camp for what I thought would be the worst part of army training. I couldn't be more wrong. Now back then, I was super fit and very happy-go-lucky. It took to the training event, though it was incredibly tough with horrible accommodation, bad food, and running rag from 4 a.m. until 9 p.m. every single day. But I got through and passed. To still remember my passing out parade and how proud my mom was watching me in my uniform marching around. After you finish the Hell of Boot Camp, you go top phase 2, which is your trade training, which depending on what you chose would decide where you went. Form as a chef was Stomar, Barracks, and Eldershot. However, until your phase 2 training started, everybody, no matter the trade, went to Deep Cut Barracks, delightful camp about 1 mile from Pierbright, soonly down the road. Initially, I was very excited to be leaving basic training. After all, the food was better. You could have duvet on your bed, and the regime was nowhere near as strict as Pierbright. When you first arrive, you were all put into a new arrivals building, sharing a room with 10 others, until they decide what platoon you got to. I assume based on the length of time you'll be there. So I settled in for my first night. I knew a few of my roommates from my training platoon, my very first night at camp. I got a glimpse into the realities of what deep coat was. I woke up around 1 a.m. and needed the bathroom. Upon getting to the door before I could open it, 2 guys in gas masks carrying pillowcases barged into the room. They ran straight to the far bed and proceeded to batter the lad sleeping in the bed with what looked from the outline like helmets in the pillowcase. After watching this stunned, I thought I should get help. And at waist then I noticed the corporal who was in charge of us that night was holding the door open for the 2 guys. He looked hammered and was in hysterics that was unfolding. The assault lasted for probably 30 seconds before they ran out, followed by the corporal at the door, and I could hear them pissing themselves with laughter as they ran down the stairs. After helping the batter lad to the bathrooms, I watched him clean himself up. Neither of us said anything. After all, he looked about my age, 16. What could we do if one of the people in charge was involved? And basically behind this in the next few days, I came to realize this camp was basically where sergeants, corporals, and officers went if they had failed in their careers or for punishment. What better people to look after 200 to 300 young, impressionable soldiers, all between the ages of 16 and their very early 20s. They got drunk and did things to us for their own amusement. I had the hope and knowledge it would be okay. You normally spend on your at most 2 weeks here. I would be out of here soon. On day 3, I got called into the sergeant's office. He explained that due to the fact they are so short out of army chefs, nobody wanted to be a heroic army chef, so they were critically short. I had to wait a deep cut for enough chefs to pass basic training before going on to my next phase. After asking how long 3 months was, their reply, 3 months of this hellhole. I thought I couldn't get any worse. I was very, very wrong at this stage. I got introduced to my platoon while I was at deep cut, my brand new platoon sergeant. We'll refer to him as Sergeant. Initially sounded very friendly and spoke with a soft Sunderland accent. Has started by laying down ground rules, cleaning it. It was at this point the warned use about his evil twin well laughed, but he wasn't joking. He said if we came across his twin it wouldn't end well and left you sat, after speaking to a few of the lads that had been there a week. Or so they reiterated the warning along with, do not get on Sergeant G's radar, just keep your head down. It was at this point I began hearing rumors of the things that happens in the involvement of Sergeant G. Apparently he had made this soldier the target of his evil twin and made his life in utter misery, tormenting him whenever he could. It was a few days after that I personally witnessed the evil twin action. I and a few lads were in our room when a pigeon flew in through the open window. After several hilarious attempts to shoo the bird out, we failed, and the pigeon carried on flying around and landing on lockers. That was when Sergeant G entered the room and asked what was going on. After explaining about the pigeon, I will show you how to catch him, he says, then proceeded to jump from the beds into the air in an attempt to catch the bird. At first, this was hilarious. We were all laughing, even Sergeant G, until it went on for at least 30 minutes, maybe more. He just didn't stop. He was relentless. The poor pigeon, probably scared to death at this point, got himself caught by Sergeant. Now what happened next, you may think is, but I can 100% swear to this and will always remember this moment. Sergeant G put the pigeon's head in his mouth and bit it clean off. He then spat the head out onto the beds and threw the body out of the window. Stunned by this, we just stood there while the demented sergeant kept saying, "Evil Ed's had his dinner," and laughing. Well, this is probably the most psychotic event I have ever witnessed. The sheer cruelty of Sergeant G was legendary. One day in the height of summer, he made us push a huge temporary road around a field barehanded. If you have never seen one of those, it's basically a gigantic roll of rubber and steel. Being jet black and being in the sun all day, this thing was incredibly hot. So hot, in fact, that all of our palms and fingers turned into one huge blister on each hand. After inspecting the damage to our ravaged hands, he shouted at us for not having men's hands sieve into the women. Not satisfied with this, he ordered us to grab a huge rope from the back of a Land Rover and ordered us to have a tug of war with this rough strip of rope, until the blisters all tore off our hands. Pain of the raw flesh of our hands was incredible, especially when he then ordered us to do press-ups on the hot concrete. Afterwards, there was also the time the booster injection they give everyone became infected in a few of us. Sergeant G's evil twin made it this mission to find out who had an infected booster site and would punish them in the site of Shardasha could to this day. I still carry the scar after he exploded my infected injection, and then of course made me to press-ups after while blood and pus poured down my arm. He would do things like hide under beds like a real-life boogeyman waiting to see if anyone would dare talk about him. More, he would hide in unlocked or empty lockers and do the same. The man was a lunatic for sure. While at deep cut I went slowly. It was boring. All we had to do was whatever the delightful training staff could dream up for us. One day the lieutenant in charge announced, "We're going on exercise for 2 nights and 3 days in the woods around Sandhurst." On the morning of the exercise, Sergeant gathered everyone on parade to get everyone organized and announced that during the exercises some of his SAS mates might make an appearance and interrogate people. I didn't think much of this, as she was always giving us veiled threats. The exercise didn't actually start off that badly. The weather during the first day was gorgeous and very sunny, and for some reason they didn't take this as an opportunity to make us do some running in the sun. That night, we settled into guard duty. To explain, you and your Bosomate bash is a hole dudge in the ground you sleep in. We'll take a stag duty which lasts for about an hour. The guard duty itself involves you lying down in a camouflage holduge, especially for the guard duty, and then none of you will go into the next bows and tell them it's their turn. And soon at the end of our turn, I went to the next boss and whispered it's their turn to stay gone. A loud voice with what sounded like a Scottish accent came from the shelter, aggressively telling Meta go away. I didn't recognize the voice and thought to myself, maybe the sass thing is true. Maybe I can be a hero and capture Sergeant G's mates, imagining what Sergeant G's face would be in the morning. When I reported that I single-handedly repelled the sass attack, I cocked my SA-880 with a blank round and demanded whoever it was show themselves. Silence angrily, I pulled back the poncho covering the basha to be greeted with what I could just see in the dark. A Sergeant G's naked body. He was in the basha shagging one of the female recruits and also put on a weird fake voice to throw me off. I stood stunned as a furious naked sergeant leapt to his feet, telling men not to say a word and to get back. On guard duty, I couldn't quite see how angry he was because it was dark, but I could hear the fury in his voice. Inao was on his radar. He was married. Inao was a witness to him messing with some woman while one exercise, and I knew would have to do something about this. The next morning, things seemed to go okay. Sergeant didn't even acknowledge me, which suited me down to the ground, and the exercise carried on until the night. The weather this night wasn't like the night before. It was torrential, and I was assigned the third stag duty, which was around 1. He seemed to recall. Now, weirdly, I was told I had to stay on with the girl who Sergeant was shagging, which was odd, as my boss Hamada didn't have to do guard duty. Not sure why, but I wasn't suspicious about this sudden change. We carried on with the guard duty, chatting in low voices, bored out of our minds. As the rain hammered the waterproof material above, all of a sudden I felt a tremendous weight crash through our canopy. Onto my back, someone from behind grabbed the front of my helmet, and I could feel what seemed to be a knife against my throat. Pulling my helmet tighter backwards, it felt like someone headbutting or hitting the back of my helmet with something. He demanded I drop my rifle in the same Scottish accent I heard the night before, pulling me to me feet. The youth sheered me forward into the dark forest. Glancing down, I caught a glimpse of the girl I was on guard duty with and could see how terrified she was when we locked eyes for a moment. Then she carried on, leaning down with her hands behind her helmet. I remember stumbling through the woods for probably 10 minutes in the pitch black when the voice ordered me to lay face down on the ground, dropping down into what was a huge muddy puddle. It tried to keep my head up face away from inches of muddy water. The voice then demanded my name ranking number, which I gave him. He replied, hadn't believe me, he would shove my head into the puddle. Foot daring to look up slightly. I could see 2 pairs of boots, so I knew it must be Sergeant Gand, probably one of the corporals. The other one didn't speak at all. They then started asking about how many people were in our platoon and who was in charge, to which I obviously gave them all they want to know. Being 16 and terrified of being alone in the woods with what I knew as Sergeant G, I didn't want to make him angry. This of course had the opposite effect. He gave me what felt like a prite to the testicles, as hard as she could. The pain from this was excruciating. It felt like I wanted to throw up. Every instinct was to curl up into the fetal position, but they wouldn't allow me to. This carried on for a further 20 to 25 minutes, with the masking things like how great Sergeant was or which corporals in the platoon were the biggest slags in the platoon. No matter what answer with violence like kicks to the ribs, my fingers being trod on into felt like a thin stick whipping the back of my thighs. Thankfully, they got bored or realized I couldn't carry on doing this without doing some serious damage. I was ordered to my feet and led back to the area our platoon was camped out and told to go ahead alone when fairly close. After retrieving my rifle from the girl who was still on stag duty alone, she asked what happened. I always remember this, as I didn't want to seem like a coward. It told her nothing had happened. He just asked me questions. However, I was crying inside. All I wanted to do was go home to me mom. Pathetic as that sounds, but it felt violated. The next morning was the end of the exercise. Sergeant gathered everyone, and after some debriefing mainly about how bad we had done, had then announced that his mates from the SAS reported that they had interrogated a few people while staring at meth the whole time. The whole march back, all I could think of was how he was going to get me. Now everyone knew what he was like and without a doubt would be targeted by him. Now the misery was unbearable. I wanted the march to last longer because at least everyone was present, couldn't single me out. We got back to camp and everyone said about cleaning gear. When I was told the officer wanted to see, my heart leapt, thinking maybe the girl had reported what had happened. Would this be my savior? And in a way, it was. The officer informed me that there were enough people to form a training troop at Stomar passing out from here, so I would be leaving at the end of this week. Thankfully, I managed to avoid Sergeant G4. The whole week I volunteered to set up the field for RLC Day and was under the supervision of a different sergeant. So that's it, my epic tale of deep-cut barracks as mentioned at the start. It tried to let the tribunal know of what occurred. They didn't want to know. This man affected me in such a way that I still have recurring nightmares that I've rejoined the army and he's going to get this revenge. And as for Sergeant, don't worry about him, boys and girls. He got this just dessert for all the years of torment that doled out to vulnerable young soldiers. The army recognized this and depromoted him high as now the officer in charge of recruit welfare in the British Army. I wish this was Ali, but unfortunately it's story 3 not. This happened 24 years ago in July of 1996. I had finished my term of service for the Army. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and decided at midnight I would out-process and travel back to Wisconsin. All day I was so anxious that I had trouble sleeping. Finally, at 11:45 p.m., I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Of course, knowing people wanted to sign out at midnight, had decided, dead to do his rounds, you can't leave until you get your final sign-off with the sergeant and turn in your room key, so I waited and waited. And finally, at 2:45 a.m. It turned in the key, got the sign-off, and at 3:30 a.m. I was on my way. At first, I was so full of adrenaline that it felt like I could drive for days. Unfortunately, that adrenaline didn't last long, and by the time I was getting through Dallas, I was nodding off. I decided just past Denton that I would pull over at the next rest and take a quick nap until the sun came up. I could barely keep my eyes open when I came to a stop. I pulled over and got out of my car to get some air, throw something away, and get a look at my surroundings. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks. It was a picnic stop, not arrest stops on restrooms. I threw my trash away and glanced at a poster of a few missing persons, but I really didn't pay any attention to it. I went back to my car, which was a basic Geo Metro. No radio, no power windows, no power locks. I cracked the windows and turned on the boombox I had for some tunes and laid down to get some sleep. I was only asleep maybe 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked an eye open and looked and didn't see anything, so I blew it off and went back to sleep. I then heard what sounded like my door handle being pulled and scratching on the door key. As it tapped quickly, but I didn't see Anne. Yonethera looked at all the windows and didn't see anyone, so again I shrugged it off as me being tired and laid back down and turned off the radio. Being a Texas night in July, it was hot, but I was so tired I just laid back down. A few more minutes later, I heard the door handle again and the car really shook as it tapped quickly and saw a man standing at the passenger side looking in. Even though it was hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and I couldn't see his face being young and dumb and just out of the military. I yelled at him, "What the hell do you want?" He just stared at me so like an idiot. I got out of the car. Mind you, I'm only 5'6", but I was pissed. He just walked off towards the picnic tables like nothing had happened. All the while I'm yelling at him that if he came back, I would take him out. I decided I would just drive on from the I got back in and went on my way. Even though I was upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was super tired again. Luckily, about another 10 miles down I-35 there was another picnic stop. Not sure why North Texas doesn't have rest areas, but they don't. I pulled into the Scon picnic stop and backed into a spot, just in case I needed to leave quickly. Not sure why, but there was only one other cart there and no my trucks. I again locked the doors, cracked the windows, and turned on my boombox. I fell asleep right away, and about 30 minutes later, I heard a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up and looked around, and nobody was there. I got out of the car, which was pretty stupid, but I had my Mako military attitude going, but none was around. I assumed it was my nerves from the other stop. I got back in my car, locked the doors again, and closed my eyes. This time I was too amped to fall asleep, so I lay there with my eyes closed. I felt that someone was looking at me, and I opened my eyes and saw the guy standing there again with the red sweatshirt. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see he was smiling at me. I popped up quick and tried to quickly open the door and bump him. Being a cheap Geo, since the doors were locked, it didn't open. He walked backwards, still staring at me. By the time I got out, it was about 30 feet away facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, he looked really skinny, but was about 6'2" or maybe 6'3". It still felt like I could take him with my military experience, lol. He was wearing the red hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes. For some reason, I thought the shoes looked odd. I could see something shine every now and then. Asha stood there staring at me. I believe it was a Mac T. I quickly reached into my back seat and grabbed my baseball bat and started yelling at him to come get some. Not sure why, I said that he started walking towards me, and it took a few steps towards him, not truly thinking. As I got about 5 feet from my car, he was now about 15 feet from me. ILO van pulled up real quick and parked just off to the side of my car. I finally realized what was happening, and I saw 2 guys also wearing hooded sweatshirts in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition. Since I backed in, I was able to cut it hard right and peel my car out of the where I was so lucky being in a manual car, I didn't stall the car because the other two guys were out of the van, and the first guy was just about at my car. Jumped back on the interstate and didn't stop until I was about 20 min to Oklahoma. I stopped for gas and used the restroom in the restroom. I noticed that the same flyer I barely glanced at the first picnic stop. It was basically a flyer with several missing persons on it and a warning to people not to stop for long periods of time at the resteras. It described a possible suspect as 6 tall, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and aired hooded sweatshirt. I completely went white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin wide awake. Not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone about it. But I now live in North Texas and pass those 2 picnic stops every day on my way to work. And I think about it quite often. I wonder if they got anyone else or if they called them. I tried looking it up, but I didn't find any stories about it on the internet. Story 4. These events occurred during a year I moved from Belfast in Ireland to Ascity in the mainland UK for university in order to pay the bills and needed a job. And it just so happened that a guy I had worked with back home was in charge of opening a UK branch of a bar chain that started in Ireland in the same city at the exact same time. He sorted me out with a job right away, and I became the de facto supervisor manager when he wasn't around, solely because I was the first employee hired. Gradually he hired a handful of Irish students, and the bar, despite the fact that it had no remotely Irish features, became known as an Irish bar. Can't really blame the mace. It had an Irish owner, an Irish supervisor manager, and over half the employees were Irish. Me and 2 other guys, both English, I'll call them, and Jake, became close and worked the most shifts getting to know the regulars. There were a few creepy drunken guys or people trying to sneak drugs in the toilets, but nothing worse than what goes on in every bar or club. That was until a certain regular who would usually frequent the place at quiet hours and sit in the many nooks avoiding chit-chat started to make conversation with the workers. Immediately I understood why he avoided talking to anyone, as she obviously had suffered severe trauma to his cheek or neck area. He was a slim, unhealthy-looking man in his early 60s, with a sunken dent on the right side of his face and a massive scar running from the corner of his mouth to his temple. His voice was also extremely croaky and deep, and I would have to lean over the counter, putting my ear within centimeters of his mouth to even sort of hear him. I would end up just smiling and nodding like an idiot so as to avoid being rude. The only things I definitely always made out were Belfast Arm, another city in Ireland, and Yellow Dog. I felt sorry for him, because I assumed he had suffered throat cancer or something similar, and always humored him, even though he was nearly impossible to hear. I would normally walk the short distance home from work, event though it was through the city center during the middle of the night. It was nearly always busy, as it was a big student town. I only had one weird experience because of this, when I was stopped by a tall, nervous-looking guy down the one alleyway. I had to walk. He asked me for a cigarette, and when I told him I didn't smoke, he noticed my accent and started walking with Metal King about being from Ireland. I was pretty uncomfortable at this point, as it was like 200, until I reached the busy high street, where he surely wouldn't try anything. But they kept saying, "My dad's Irish, give me your number and I'll sort you out," whatever the hell that meant. He kept telling me to get my phone out so I could take his number. It was obvious to me that he just wanted to see if it was worth stealing so he could mug me. After much insistence that I was okay, he eased off as we neared the high street and said, "I like you, mate. If you ever gain any bother, tell them you're Jameson's name changed cousin." I just mumbled thanks and figured I was lucky to get out of being mugged. When I mentioned this to Jake, he laughed and told me that I definitely was lucky, as the Jamesons were the main gang in the city. He told me that they were traditionally Irish travelers, but mostly now English and liked to look after their own. Cool. I was an honorary gang member. I thought and forgot about it. Months later, we were talking about some of the characters that show up at the bar, and a member of the door staff who was joking around said to me, "I'm surprised you're so friendly with A." He explained that the scarred regular was a member of the British Army Parachute Para-Regiment and had served in Ireland. It should now explain why I've mentioned Ireland so much this far. For people that don't know, there has been plenty of death and heartache in Ireland going back hundreds of years. In 1916, it was split into the bottom 26 counties, known as the Republic of Ireland Independent, and the top 6 counties became Northern Ireland, controlled by the British government. Belfast, where I'm from, is the capital of Northern Ireland and experienced its worst time from the 1960s to the 1990s. Known as the Troubles, nationalist Republicans who wanted a full 32-count united Ireland were at war with Unionists loyalties who wanted to remain under British rule. It resulted in plenty of death and wrongdoing on Both sides during this time, the British government sent in their army, which only served to escalate tensions, and many atrocities were committed by the British army against the nationalist Republican side. As a result, there is a massive dislike and mistrust of the British army in this part of the island. Also, people who work in an Irish bar would generally consider themselves nationalists. Not always, but it was true for all the members of staff I worked with. Anyway, sorry if that was long. I brushed off that bit of faux thinking he was a harmless old codger and that I wouldn't let old prejudice get the better of me. The old guy started coming in more and more, always doing the same thing. Sit at the bar, order 2 bottles, drink on, and give the other whoever served him, and then leave after some 90-cent audible chat. It then began to notice he would only ever get a second beer for the English employees. I was being stupid. I told myself the troubles were a long time ago and the majority of people have moved on. But then another Irish employee mentioned it to me. Whatever let him hold his prejudice, it was 2032. I wasn't about to let some old sectarian loser get me annoyed. Hestil talked to me, still smiled politely and nodded. It wasn't until I started thinking back on it that he was always sneering as she talked to me when he mentioned Ireland. Heathen began to only talk to Kevin or Jake, both of whom were in the pretty boy mold. Short, slim, good-looking guys in their early 20s who were chatty and good fun. He would start to stay longer and only talk with them. Often he would be clearly looking at me and saying stuff, smirking, that I couldn't make him out. When I would ask them what he said, old just shrug and say, how the heck am I meant to know? And laugh. What really set off alarm bells in my head was when he began to come in for a drink with guys of similar description and ply them with drinks all night, always young men shorter than him with a slim build. Guy in his 60s buying drink all night for unassuming young men. I mean, it could be all above board, but it seemed very off to me. My suspicions were confirmed when I was told that while I was back at home for midterm, he had been caught by the bouncer supplying the poor young guy he was in with that night with ecstasy. Hopefully in exchange for just cash, although something told me otherwise. I figured that was the end of that. He'd be in prison, and I'd forget they even existed until one night. I walked home from work at about 3 a.m. Manswiped my key card to get in the grounds of my halls. The gate was electric and took like 5 minutes to slowly close, making it easy for someone without a key card to sneak in. As I walked a short distance to the actual front door of my halls, I heard quick footsteps and swung around to see the scarred-up drug-dealing Jigsarm my guy staring right back at me. I was shocked. What the heck am I supposed to do? I was pretty sure I could take him if it came to that, although maybe he would pull some crazy army. He just kept staring at me and babbling incoherently. I had no idea what I was supposed to do, and we just stared at each other from a few yards away for what seemed like 20 minutes. Then he began to creep slowly towards me. I want to quickly get through the door to my halls, but it was another slow-moving gate that he could follow me through. I was mentally preparing myself to have to get physical with this guy when I desperately remembered my run with a gang member. Listen, mate, I'm a cousin of the Jamesons. Do you want me to get them on the phone? I blurted out I was pretty anxious in case he said, yes, go ahead and let them come around. But after a few seconds, his face broke out in a familiar, disgusting smirk, the kind that said, I'm almost certain that you're bullshitting me, but I'm not about to risk it. He turned and vaulted the now closed gate with unnerving ease. I didn't see him again for the rest of the year, but found out when I returned in September from the bouncer who caught him with drugs and had been involved with the prosecution that he was now in prison. He was indeed an ex-British Army soldier who had served in South Arma, a particularly bad area during the Troubles. For a soldier to be based with a Yellow Dog parachute regiment, he was notorious for preying on young students and supplying them with drugs in return for sex. He also had an intense hatred for Irish people. I'm assuming he had some pretty rough times while serving there and liked to do the rounds of all the Irish bars, staunting their staff. As a result of this, he became an enemy of the Jamesons for years. The creepiest thing from all of this is that on thinking back, I'm pretty sure that he was saying some pretty racist or xenophobic things to me every chance he got, but I just nodded like an idiot because I didn't want to be rude. I shuddered to think what he was actually saying to Kevin or Story 5J. So this happened in early July, and it still creeps me out a bit today. I'm a soldier and live in the barracks on bases since I'm not married and can't really afford my own place. For security reasons, I will not name the base or its location. It is typically pretty quiet around here aside from the common parties that happen on the weekends, so this event was pretty surprising to me. Additionally, I worked a night shift 4 days a week from 2 to midnight, so it is even quieter on most days when I returned to my room. This night, however, was on 4th of July weekend. The military gets a 4-day weekend on federal holidays, so the common area was a bit louder on Thursday night, my last work day for the week. When I got back, To give you a better idea about the layout, the barracks are separated into 4 3-story buildings that share a large concrete common area. Since we obviously can't smoke in our rooms, the common area should have 2 smoking areas. We call them smoke pits, one either side. The pits each consist of a picnic table, a grill, and a large trash bin covered by an awning to block out the rain. The pits are the site of the most parties that occur on the weekends, mainly the one furthest from my building. I had gotten out of work early, so it was about 10 when I got to the barracks and made my way to my room. As per usual on nights that I don't have work days following them, there was a party at the pit furthest from my building where most of the people outside were at. However, there was one person at my building's pit. Originally, I assumed he was just out there to smoke and wasn't up for the partying. What was strange, however, was that he had no lit cigarette, no vaping, wasn't on his phone. His phone just sat there dressed in blue jeans and ard hoodie with his hood up. It was the middle of July in the south, so this was a bit strange, but the rooms are pretty much perpetually cold during the summer. We don't control the ache, and the barracks NCOs just blast the on high at like 65 degrees for the entire summer for whatever reason. So I figured he might have just stepped out to warm up. He sat on the table with his arms in his front pockets and his head hanging, wanting to smoke. He stood at the opposite side of the table and lit a cigarette. The guy didn't speak or even move for the entire time. I was there. He just sat there blankly staring into his lap. I didn't think much of it and just made my way to my room, changed, and just patrolled YouTube for a while. It's important to note a few things here. Each room houses 2 soldiers and the doors automatically lock when closed. The only people with the key are the unit headquarters and the room's residents themselves. In the event that our resident loses their key, they have to call to get someone to unlock it every time they need to get into the room until the key is replaced. Additionally, my room is located on the second floor of the building and is a bit tucked away around the back. Sound like the rest of the building, there is next to not traffic outside of my room. Lastly, my side of the room has the only window, and it's where the door is, so I can hear when someone rarely passes my room. Finally, my roommate worked an odd shift from 8:00 to 4 am, and I wasn't too sure what day she worked. Also, the room is very dark, and I cannot see if my roommate is asleep in the room when I first enter, so I close the door quietly by keeping the knob turned as it closes. This is important. He wasn't home at this time, at around 2 a.m. I hunkered down to get some sleep before I dozed off. However, I could hear shuffling outside. I peeked out the window and could see some obviously inebriated girl tripping over herself to get to her room. I knew the girl lived in the room next to mine, so I didn't see a need to help her since she was literally right there. But I listened for a while until I heard her enter room. About 10 minutes later, I heard someone walking towards my door and stop. I figured it was my roommate getting home, but I couldn't hear the obvious sound of someone unlocking the door. For a long moment it wasn't. Then I heard the sound of my door slowly opening. Instantly as a tup and looked at the front of my bed where the door was. There was no sound of the doorknob turning and no click of the lock. Door was just slowly being pushed open as if someone was trying to enter very quietly, which wasn't like my roommate. After the door was fully open, someone in uniform walked in. At first I didn't recognize who it was until I noticed the red hoodie. I gasped and screamed, "Get the hell out of here." The man jumped and darted out of the room, jumped out of bed and ran to the door. But by the time I made it, the guy had jumped over the rail and onto the bushes below and was running across the common area. Immediately, I called the MPs and they arrived within minutes. Few of them did a search of the area, while the rest made trips around the rooms to check on everyone. The girl's room next to mine was also not closed. I eventually found the guy in a storage room of another one of the barracks buildings. A few weeks passed until I found out the whole story. Apparently the guy wasn't even a soldier, but was an ex with a girl who lived next to me. Prior to that night, the ex didn't know what room she lived in and had attempted to follow her to her room after she had finished partying. He knew she didn't have a roommate at the times, so I feared he'd be able to prey on her without anyone noticing. I don't know how the guy got on the base, since there are always ID checks at the gate and the guy didn't even have identification on him. Fortunately for the girl might attempt to be quiet, I had accidentally not closed my door completely and the guy mistook my room for hers. What's worse is that the girl had not closed her door all the way either, so had the guy not mixed up the room she'd have broken into hers while she was extremely drunk and likely unconscious. While I'm fortunate that the girl is safe, I fear for what might have happened had I been asleep when that creep was in my room. Typically the barracks are supposed to be safe places for troops to sleep and things of this nature don't really happen. It goes to show you that you need to be careful no matter where you are.